Welcome to the Private Practice Startup Podcast, where we help ambitious private practitioners across the globe to brand themselves and grow their dream practices. We chat with successful private practitioners, business coaches, and marketing experts, bringing you tons of practice building ninja tips. Visit privatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and our signature marketing e-course. Here are your co-hosts, Dr. Kate Campbell and Katie Lemieux.
Hey, Startup Nation, welcome back to another episode on the Up Close and Personal podcast series. And this is where we interview the people that you wanted us to interview most. You voted on them, and we are getting up close and personal. And today we're getting up close and personal with Gordon Brewer. So before I introduce him and before we start chatting, I hope that you guys listened to our episode last time, which was with Marissa Lawton. You're definitely going to love listening to that episode as well. And if you are a first-time guest, welcome to the podcast. And we hope that you'll be a longtime family member, but you're a family member already. And you know what? Kate and I really love to treat our family members right. We actually like to give you gifts when you come into the family. So head on over to privatepracticestartup.com, slide on over to the resources tab, and there you'll see a bunch of gifts, but I'd love to really recommend to you our paperwork course, because like it or not, as therapists, we all have to have paperwork. So this teaches you kind of the do's and don'ts of what you need to have and really being able to avoid legal risk. So that's our gift to you, and feel free to indulge on anything else that is there. So I'm really excited that Gordon is here. Gordon has an interesting background in the therapy world. So Gordon is the person behind the Practice of Therapy podcast and blog. He's the owner of a group practice located in Kingsport, Tennessee, Kingsport Counseling Associates, PLLC. He's been in private practice for 18 years. He's an AAMFT approved supervisor and currently serves on the board of the TNAMFT. I had to say that slow. I think I would have messed it up. Gordon also happens to be a clergy person in the Episcopal Church. He also had an interesting previous career as a funeral director and embalmer. I told you guys this is why it makes him very interesting. Lots of stories there. Gordon is married to his wife named Sister, so not his sister, and they have one daughter who works as an environmental educator. Gordon, it's a pleasure to have you back on the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here. I was so excited that you guys asked me to do this. It's fun. It's just fun.
Yes, we're so excited to have you back.
Uh-huh. Yeah, as one of my good friends said, always has said, if it's not fun, it ain't worth doing. So that's how. Yeah.
There you go. I have to constantly remind myself of that, because I can definitely get into the doing and being way too serious. So I'm always actually in my daily commitment, I'm writing, and you're going to do this and have fun, and you're going to do this and have fun, just to remind myself. So Gordon, we always like to take a step back in time. So we're going to bring you back in time and just kind of understand a little bit about you and your upbringing and growing up, and where were you born, and just that story everybody wants to know. Oh,
wow. Wow. So this is really up close and personal. So, I was born in North Carolina. I grew up, I spent most of my formative years in a place called Cary, North Carolina, which is just outside of Raleigh. And it was just a little bitty place when I was growing up, but now it's, I get lost there now. But let's see, my dad was a pastor, so I kind of grew up in the whole church world stuff, although he was a Baptist pastor. I've got a younger brother and younger sister, and so I grew up there, and then went on. When I graduated high school, I went to a little small place now. It's now called Mars Hill University, but it's Mars Hill College back then. And I majored in psychology, so I had originally planned on doing pre-med, but chemistry kicked my butt, and so I decided it was time to change up, and so went into psychology. And it was really during that time that the seed was planted, I like to say, of just thinking about becoming a therapist. I've told this story, I don't know if I've told it here, but I've told this story before about being going to a movie that came out during that time, and I'm really dating myself here. And it was the movie was a movie with Donald Sutherland and Mary Tyler Moore, and it was called I'm going to draw a blank, but I'll remember it here in a minute. But anyway, there was a scene in the movie where a psychiatrist played by Judd Hirsch helped this kid through a crisis. He was thinking about suicide, and that just really just kind of resonated with me. And so I really, that was also the point at which I kind of decided, I think I'll go into psychology and see what to do there. And then I did that, graduated from college, but I took kind of a left turn or a U-turn or something with my career. And that's when I had started working as an assistant at a funeral home. I was, back in that day, it was, they had an apartment that they wanted folks to stay in and answer the phone at night. And this was before answering services and all that kind of stuff really took off. So I did that and could tell you lots of funeral home stories, but got interested in the funeral business. And so I decided after I graduated from Mars Hill to go on to mortuary school. And so I did that and got licensed as a funeral director and an embalmer and all that kind of stuff. And so I did that for around 18 years or more. And then towards the end of that career is when I really kind of buckled down and said, I really want to get back into counseling and psychology and therapy. And so I went back to graduate school and got my degree in counseling with a concentration in marriage and family therapy. So that's how it all came together with all of that. And,
gotcha.
I would imagine that you were probably doing some counseling naturally as a funeral home director and being in that business with people grieving.
Yes. And that was one of the things that I had was really interested in, and I guess really kind of drove me back to graduate school. Was I realized I was just really limited in how I could work with people and help people. I mean, I could take them through the mechanics of planning a funeral and learned a lot about empathy and joining with people and all that kind of stuff. All those things that we call it in this field. We didn't call it that in as a funeral director, but so I learned, and also I got to meet a lot of great people. There's a guy by the name of Earl Grollman that has written a lot of books on death and dying, and so I got to meet him. Another one is Alan Wolfelt, and worked with them just around grief and the whole death and dying and this whole field that's out there called thanatology, just as the study of death and dying. And so got really interested in that. And then, so you're right, Kate. It just kind of prepared me, I think, a lot of what I do now as a therapist.
So Gordon,
go ahead. Sorry, Katie. Jinx, I wonder, I know you alluded to a moment ago that you could share a lot of stories with us about the funeral home experience. I'm just wondering if you have a crazy story that you might be willing to share with us.
Okay, this is hopefully I'll try to make this the condensed version of it. But living where I live now in the Appalachian Mountains, that when I moved up here from North Carolina to East Tennessee, I really felt like I had stepped back in time because the people here are very traditional in their way of seeing things and doing things. And and so when I moved up here and started working for the funeral home here in Kingsport, I was faced with a lot of new customs, particularly around funerals. And one of the customs that was pretty common even back then was for when a person died is that they would take the body home for the wake. And so we had this particular family that actually lived in like a single wide mobile home, but they insisted on bringing their dad home for the wake. And so we did everything we could to be accommodating. Well, one thing we ran into first off is that the casket wouldn't fit through the door. And so So the first thing with that is that, okay, they were just so insistent on this. So the only way we were going to be able to get the casket in the door was to turn it sideways. So we had to take the poor man out of the casket, get the casket in the door, to turn it sideways, and then bring him in and put him back in the casket. So, but during the process of the wake, we left them there to do their thing for the night, and Dad was at home, and so they decided that they were going to have a party, and so they commenced to drinking and partying and stuff, and then they decided, okay, well, we need to get Dad out of the casket so we can make pictures with him. So they managed to get their dad out of the casket and get him propped up in a chair, and started taking pictures. But then I was on call that night, and I got a call in the middle of the night from the guy at the funeral home that was the attendant there, and he said, "Gordon, we've got a problem." I said, "Okay, what is it?" So, well, the so-and-so family has somehow or another gotten their dad out of the casket, and they can't figure out how to get him back in. And so what this family didn't realize is that when you put a body in a casket, most caskets are hinged kind of in the middle, and so there's a bottom half and a top half. They didn't know you could open up that bottom half of the casket, so they were trying to stuff Dad in through the top of the casket back into the casket. So anyway, we went out there and got poor Dad back in the casket, and we had to kind of admonish the family not to do that. But I did get to see the pictures later of Dad in the chair. So that
is such a funny story, Gordon. And it reminds me, is that where Weekend at Bernie's was created? Clearly this has happened.
Exactly. It was
more times than we can imagine.
Right. And that's So Weekend at Bernie's actually does happen sometimes.
Thank you for that story. That was very funny. That was good. So let's just take a quick moment to thank our sponsor after that story, which was awesome.
When you're in private practice, it can be tough to find the time to review your marketing efforts, let alone make improvements when they're needed. Whether you're a seasoned clinician whose current website needs to be revamped, or a new therapist building a website for the first time, Brighter Vision is here to help. By understanding your business and what makes it unique, Brighter Vision's team of designers then uses this information to create a custom website catered to your specific marketing goals. Better yet, every website includes professional search engine optimization to make sure you get found in online searches, as well as unlimited technical support so your website can change and grow along with your practice. The best news of all, listeners of the Private Practice Startup Podcast get $100 off any new website. To get started, head on over to brightervision.com/PPS. Again, that's brightervision.com/PPS.
If you've ever felt lost trying to find great people for your business, you need to try Wise Hire. They're an online recruiting system that makes the hard parts of hiring, like making ads, posting to job boards, and tracking candidates fast and easy. Plus, they're super affordable. We love that their DISC personality assessment helps you find exactly who you're looking for. We know it's tough to juggle all you do, and hiring the right way can be a full-time job. With Wise Hire, it feels like someone's with you, supporting you every step of the way. Their team lives and breathes their mission of both helping you hire and helping teams create fulfilling careers and happy lives. And that's something we really believe in. Right now, they're offering a free strategy session to the Private Practice Startup listeners. If you're thinking about growing your practice, you've got to get on this call. They are the experts on building amazing teams from the ground up. Start hiring or book your free strategy session today at wisehire.com/PPS. That's Wisehire, WIZEHIRE.com/PPS. I'm curious, Gordon, for you growing up, so you were the middle child, yeah?
No, I was the oldest. Actually.
The oldest. Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
I was the oldest, yeah.
So did you have the oldest child kind of mentality? And
I did. I was kind of the rule follower, or at least I thought I was, and just kind of, was the good kid, so to speak. Although my younger brother, my sister and I will tell this, is that he could do no wrong, and he was kind of the golden child and that sort of thing. My sister was the troublemaker, which probably explains why she went to ECU, Kate.
Yes, I can relate to that.
So that was me. And, but I never did really do well in high school, just grade wise. I was one of those kids that always got, called out in class for daydreaming, especially when I was a younger kid. I was, always get a note sent home for daydreaming, which I, come to find out, I mean, that's really probably why I've got such a entrepreneurial spirit now, is just doing the dreaming and the creating and thinking all these big thoughts and big ideas and that kind of thing. But and so I had this when I was in high school. I just knew they were going to pull me off stage before I graduated, because I just kind of eked by, and it didn't really blossom until I got into college and really kind of thrived there and really kind of found my place.
I'm curious if your parents were with us today, what would they say about you as a kid? What type of kid were you?
I was the quiet one, and I was the one that they had to push to kind of get me to do things. I mean, I was real kind of a passive kid, so that would be what I guess they would say. But at the same time, I would think and hope that they would kind of proud of how I accomplished. I think they were surprised at how it turned out. I was that way, and I was, and I was a little bit more of the religious one, I guess you could say. But growing up in a pastor's family, I was more into church things and church activities, which I guess is kind of what led me into becoming a clergy person in the Episcopal Church, which I changed denominations, which was a pretty radical, for some would be a pretty radical change, but for me, it just really fit.
And how did your family feel about that?
They were very embracing of that. Even though my dad was a Baptist pastor, he was a much more liberal, kind of moderate kind of Baptist pastor. They were very, even now the church that he was pastor of, we lost my dad last year at Thanksgiving, but even the church now that he was pastor of is very affirming and very open to LGBTQ people and, all of that. And so it's a very embracing, progressive kind of church. So it's and personally, that's how I feel. I just feel like, we got to be open to everyone and to be able to embrace and understand everyone as to where they are in their lives. And there's room for all of us. So
nice. And with losing your dad last year and also working in the funeral industry, do you think any of that helped prepare you for any of the losses in your life? And if so, how?
Yeah. So with my dad, he had dementia and Alzheimer's, and so we kind of saw him fade away. And, I think one of the things that I see that was just a real gift to me was our whole family was there when he passed. And so that is indelibly linked in my mind. Yeah, I think intellectually I knew about grief, but emotionally grief is different. And even now I'd say I'm still kind of grieving my dad because I've been thinking about him a lot this summer, and it could be sparked by the COVID situation and all of that. But so I think it's ultimately everybody has to grieve in their own way in their own time. But yeah, I've got a lot of head knowledge about it, but I think on a heart level we all experience the same kind of pain.
For sure. The experience is definitely different.
Right.
Yeah. So what were some of or I should say maybe a highlight of kind of growing up and maybe a more difficult time of growing up?
Yeah. So, I think I had a great childhood, this year was a big year for me because I turned 60, believe it or not. But so I grew up in the 70s and just growing up in just Cary at the time was a small town. And I just remember all of the kids of the neighborhood just on our bikes and up and down and playing in the woods and the creeks and all that kind of stuff, which just has a lot of great memories for me. And I was sharing with Kate earlier that my family has a place in North Carolina on Lake Lure. And so I spent a lot of summer times on Lake Lure, just doing lake stuff and all of that. And so that's a lot of great memories for me. And that's just a real special place for our family even now. And so I felt like I grew up in that, and you reminded me, you talked about a hard time growing up. And this might have been something that kind of pushed me towards grief and funeral homes and that kind of thing. My brother's best friend, his name was James. James was tragically killed. He was mowing his yard, and he was turning, he was about 11, 12 years old at the time, and he was turning his lawnmower around, and a car butt came by and hit him. And so James, who was a kid that was around our house and with my little brother, I just saw him as these bratty little snot-nosed kids, but James died, and that just deeply affected our family and just the grief around that. And so that was a really, really hard time, in growing up and just thinking about that being such a pivotal thing. When I was in high school, I volunteered, and I was in the rescue squad in our town. So I learned how to be an EMT and all that kind of stuff. And so that was an exciting time, but also at the same time got to see a lot of, hardship and hard things with people. But it was fun, as a kid in their late teens to get to ride the ambulances and the sirens and all that kind of stuff was exciting stuff at that time. So I did that. And I guess too, just with here recently in our family, just with my wife and her health issues, that's been a big life changer for me, and just having to make those adjustments, dealing with a wife that's disabled and really limited in her mobility, and then dealing with my dad's death last year. All of that, that's what life is, and learning how to just accept that as we go along.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to kind of shift into a little bit more of like how you got into this career and stuff like that, but let's just take a quick moment to thank our sponsor. Tired of never quite feeling comfortable with your practice financials? I'd like you to meet Green Oak Accounting. Their goal is to empower private practice owners with the financial information they need to make good business decisions. They specialize in working with solo and group private practices in the mental health industry, so they're uniquely positioned to help with figuring out what's normal in your business finances and what's not. So if you've ever had a conversation with your accountant or bookkeeper that left you wishing that they understood private practice or had some best practices to share, head on over to greenoakaccounting.com and schedule a free consultation to see if they might be a good fit for you. They can help you with all your accounting needs, from bookkeeping to payroll to profit first and budgeting, as well as forecasting. Also, check out their new podcast, Therapy for Your Money, where Julie Harris talks about all things money, finance for private practice. So it's interesting, like you were talking about, you went to school for psychology and then you kind of took a detour, and for 18 years you were in the funeral business.
Right. So
what got you back into psychology, and kind of what path did you go at first into?
Well, there's one other part of my story. You asked about at the beginning of this, before we started recording, about one thing that I guess one big secret, not secret, but just one little thing that I did. I had been previously married and had gone through a divorce, which ended up is kind of how I ended up back in the Appalachian area, East Tennessee. Had gone through that divorce, but when I went through that divorce, when I was living in the Raleigh area, right after that, I decided, I like to refer to it as my extended sabbatical at that time, but I decided that I wanted to get out of the funeral business, and I started thinking about going back to school at that time. But one of the things I did is I decided I'm going to go on a road trip. So I packed up everything that I thought was meaningful and of value to me, and I went out west, and I stayed with an uncle in California. And that, interesting enough, he lived in Paradise, California, which is the town that one of the towns that just got totally obliterated in the fires. But anyway, I ended up working at going to Lake Tahoe and working in a casino for a while. And so I worked as what they called a pit clerk back in that day. And so I was out there on the casino floor and learned a lot about gambling and just the whole casino world. And to this day, I still love to play blackjack and craps and all that kind of stuff.
What made you want to work at the casino?
It was just, I needed a job, and I was just thought, well, this would be interesting and fun and different. And so, and so I was just fascinated by all of that. I had a friend, really a great mentor, too. Back when I was working in Raleigh, his name was Lane Beamer. I've got his picture here behind me. And he was another person that really influenced me to go into counseling. He was a psychologist and was actually working as a consultant for the funeral home I worked for at the time, doing grief follow-up and grief care and that kind of thing. And so Lane and I got to be great friends, and Lane's interest in all of this was because he had been diagnosed with melanoma. And so he was really, and right after I moved to Tennessee, this sounds like just a string of tragedies, but right after I moved to Tennessee, Lane passed away. And so he was a big influence on me of just thinking, okay, carry this further. And he and I talked about me going back to graduate school and that sort of thing. But the side note to that is Lane was the one that introduced me to craps. And we were just hanging out, and he was explaining to me how you play craps and stuff. And so when I took my trip out west, he says, you ought to stop off in Vegas and go play craps. And so he gave me a crash course in it, and I stopped off in Vegas and played craps, and just kind of caught the bug there with just doing those kinds of things. I don't think I've got a gambling problem, but I'll go play blackjack and craps and that sort of thing when I get a chance.
Well, that's funny. Ernesto often talks about his gambling fun, and it's definitely separate from everything else, right? So he can go enjoy himself.
Right. Yeah, I'll have to check in with Ernesto on that. Then we can share stories.
So thanks for sharing that. I love that you shared that. So during that time, so you got a divorce, you moved, you worked in a casino. So then how did you get back into therapy, or how did you get into therapy? Yeah,
so I was working in the funeral homes, and I changed jobs. I had an opportunity to move to another funeral home, and eventually just was the general manager at that funeral home. And it was during that time that I'd already started back to school, because I had really decided, okay, I don't want to do the funeral business for the rest of my life. And so I enrolled in graduate school, and I was really going, at that time, the program allowed me to go kind of part-time. So actually graduate school for me took about a 4-year period. And so I was working full-time at the funeral home and going to graduate school. And then when I was able to start some grief groups and that sort of thing. So that kind of helped me with my internship hours and all of that sort of thing at the time. And I just kind of went from there. And then when I graduated, again, another thing, it ended up that I ended up getting dismissed from the funeral home because of some employee issues that I learned a whole lot from in terms of managing and particularly having a group practice now, but it just was a bad thing. But the timing, it was a terrible time at the time. It was right before Christmas, but that also, I had just graduated. And so at the beginning of the year, I was able to make the shift, and I got a job with an agency. as a therapist, and worked it was a nonprofit agency, and we worked with at-risk children and youth. And so that was how I made that big pivot all at once at the beginning of that year. And that was a tough time, but it was also a time that was very life-changing for me and really just kind of pivoted me in just a totally new direction. So mm-hmm.
You alluded that you learned something about kind of management and people and leadership that's helped you in your group practice. What is that?
Right. So that kind of the backstory around that is I had an employee at the time at the funeral home, and they were basically kind of riding the time clock. In other words, they were coming in much earlier than they needed to be so they could clock in. And so at that particular time, the funeral home was owned by a corporation. And so as the manager, they were really putting a lot of pressure on us to cut down on the overtime hours. And so a no-no that I did was I told the employee, I'm going to pay you for the hours, but I can't pay you for it until, we're going to have to spread it out. And so I didn't pay them for the overtime, and they got an audit. The company got an audit and all that kind of thing. And so they basically made an example out of me by getting rid of me because it was a corporation and that sort of thing. So I learned a lot about kind of a crash course in employment law back then about, having employees and that sort of thing. And so I learned a lot from that. But it was, in my own faith view, it was a God thing in my own view, in that it really, I always like to tell people sometimes if we're not following the path that we are meant to go, sometimes God will take us to the other path, kicking and screaming. And so that's kind of my explanation of that. So that's what happened, and it ended up putting me in the place that I needed to be.
Gotcha. God will help you along, right? Boop.
Right. Get you on the right path.
Yeah. So Gordon, so many people are curious. I mean, we talked about your interesting jobs. We talked about how you got into the therapeutic world, and people are really interested also in how did you decide to start the practice of therapy and your podcast, and where do you find the time?
Yeah. So I wonder that too. Where do I find the time? That's a big topic right now. But yeah, so when I was, really, I was started listening to some podcasts, and one was our, kind of our mutual friend Joe Sanok. I was listening to his podcast and just listening to a lot of the stuff that he was doing and talking about. And one of the things I realized was, this is great stuff, and I'm learning a lot from it, and I still learn a lot from your podcast and all the ones that I listen to. And I really thought, I think that would be fun to do, is just to start a blog just about going into private practice and teaching what I've learned, because I've learned a lot the hard way. When I first went into private practice, there were not any of the resources we have now or the tools that we have now and the great stuff that you guys are doing. Boy, I wish I had you guys back then. But, it just really, I learned a lot the hard way. And so I thought, I'd like to teach others about this, because I think there's so much potential with just being in the private practice world. And as you all know, private practice isn't for everyone, but I think for those that are interested in going into it, I just wanted to give my spin on it and teach it the way I teach it, because I think people learn in different ways, and how we do things resonates with different people in different ways. So I started the blog, and then I was listening to Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income, who's one of the, for anybody that's in this entrepreneurial business space, he's one that I really recommend. And he was just talking about podcasting and how that's something that is really kind of the next, we kind of moved out of the blogging space into podcasting. It's really kind of the new platform, and it's still really in its infancy as compared to blogging. And so I started in 2017, I started the podcast, and it's just taken off since then. And so gotten to meet a lot of great people like the two of you.
And likewise. And actually, I remember when I think we were on your podcast and you were telling us that you were going to be interviewing Mike Michalowicz, and that kind of gave us the encouragement to reach out to him. And he's been on twice now. And I think we've invited him back. We'll be inviting him back for the third time to talk about his newest book. So, people are also curious too, Gordon, about how do you deal with fears, self-doubts, as well as rejection? So the fears and self-doubts of growing, anything, creating success, but also the rejection of maybe selling your services as a consultant.
Right. Yeah, I think, part of it, I think part of my fear, the getting rid of my fear has come with the fact that I've got a lot of gray in my hair now. I've just had a lot of life experiences that have been ones that are kind of scary and that sort of thing. And I think when I started the practice of therapy, I said, I'm not going to try to make this just grow real fast or just really be in it for just the sake of growing it, but really just more about being persistent and consistent with what I do. And so that's the philosophy I've taken. And I think even in private practice, I think the thing to remember is just to be consistent with it. And we're going to have failures. And if you're not failing, you're doing something wrong. Because that's how you learn and that's how you try things. And I think, you're going to have a lot of, you're going to miss the mark. I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I've learned from those. And I think part of it is being able to adopt the mindset of just being able to try some things, being able to kind of get out in the water, allow yourself to be vulnerable. I think about Brene Brown in that she talks about courage does not come without vulnerability. You have to have vulnerability first in order to show courage. And so going into private practice and being able to take this big step. Now, I don't think anybody should just dive into it, just willy-nilly. I think you really need to have some preparation going into it, understand your finances, understand the money side of things, and really do it with some knowledge around those things. But I think it's very doable. And I think the other thing about fear is I think it's so important to have supports. It's say all the time, draw on your supports. Don't try to do too much of it you're alone.
Yeah, 100%. I remember having to kind of learn that lesson. And I remember I was in community mental health, maybe in my late 20s. And I don't know, I was going through something. And my friend says, well, why don't you reach out to a therapist? And I'm like, but I'm a therapist. And she's like, oh, so you don't believe in our field? Like, you're not willing to reach out for help? And I think that really shifted. And I think it's so important, especially in business. I mean, I know Kate and I are at a place of like, who can we outsource this to? Like, that's just the first thing in our mind because we have to stay in our lane and do what we do well and allow the other people in our team to do what they do well, because it's a beautiful thing when it all works very synergistically. Right.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, that I've learned the hard way is I wish I had outsourced more in the beginning than I had. I tried to bootstrap too much and you can paint yourself in a corner with that.
Oh yeah. Totally. I can relate to that big time. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Gordon, it's been so fun, like just being with you. It's just, I don't know. I just feel like I could just sit and have a cup of coffee and chat with you. And
I would love to. Or even
eventually soon, right?
Or even a cocktail. So,
okay. Well, that's actually, it's funny because we're going to move to the lightning round. And one of the questions is there about your favorite drink. So you'll have to wait till we ask that. But it's really just been fun. I love your weekend at Bernie's story and just kind of hearing about your different interesting life experiences. So we're going to move into the lightning round. So this is kind of where we rapid fire questions at you.
Okay. Let me gird my loins here.
So, let's start off with what is your favorite drink or cocktail?
Well, I would have to say scotch.
Any particular brand of scotch?
Well, a single malt scotch. A quick little story. I'm in a scotch club, and so a group of us get together once a month, smoke cigars, and we do scotch tastings where we have 3 scotches or whiskeys, or as we like to call it, brown liquor, to taste. And so we do that. In fact, it's coming up tomorrow night. So got that every month, not every week. But scotch is my preferred brown liquor of choice.
Nice.
I've really enjoyed your stories. You're a good storyteller, Gordon. And so I'm curious if you can tell us a quick story about your most embarrassing moment.
Oh, my Lord. What would that be?
We'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, let me think. I don't get embarrassed too much anymore, but let me think about that. Go to the next question. Let me think about let me think about that one.
So what is your favorite Halloween candy, or just candy in general?
I would have to say a Snickers bar. Snickers, yeah.
Snickers.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. Someone asked us this question. It's a quick question. What's your favorite swimming stroke? I'm assuming you swim?
Yeah, I do. Probably breaststroke.
Gotcha. And growing up, did you have a childhood pet or a strange childhood pet?
Yes. Well, our dog Sam was a beagle, and he lived for 18 years.
Wow.
So that poor creature, he outlived himself. But yes, I had decided when I was a kid that I had an entrepreneurial mindset, and I decided that I would start raising white mice to sell to laboratories. And so I was probably in my teens, and so I bought these white mice, and one time they all got out of the cage, and so it was havoc in our home.
So please tell me, were your parents like, sure, Gordon, whatever, or were they
yeah? I mean, it's just kind of like I did it on my own, built the cage. I mean, I was a bootstrapper from the beginning, so I built my own cages and stuff and all that sort of thing, and and then after I jumped into it, again, this is a good reason to see to verify your project, to see if it's something you want. I come to find out that there were no laboratories that would be interested in buying my mice because they have to breed their own. But anyway, ended up, I don't know what happened to the mice. Maybe they all got away and got out and something or another. But anyway. So, yeah, that would be, I guess you could count those as pets. So,
So were you able to think about your most embarrassing moment?
Let's see. Probably my most embarrassing moment. Gosh, there's probably been a lot. Oh, gosh, I can't. There's not much that rattles me much anymore, and so it's hard to kind of place that. But probably, yeah. Here, this is a funeral home story, I guess.
Oh, yay! Another one.
Another embarrassing moment is I was preparing this body one time, and one of the things that we do is usually, if it's men or whatever, we do a trim or something like that. Shave them and all that kind of stuff. And this guy that came in, he had a really long mustache. I mean, it just kind of came down over his mouth. And so I thought, well, that doesn't look right. And so I just trimmed it up to, make it real neat or whatever. And boy, I got in trouble over that because he had the wife later brought in some mustache wax because he always had a handlebar mustache. And so I'd cut the poor man's mustache off and then had to explain to her why I did that. And so that was a pretty embarrassing moment. And it wasn't going to grow back, I'll tell you that.
Of course not.
We've come full circle with the funeral stories.
Yes, we did.
Gordon, it's such a pleasure. It's so funny. I've always been interested in death and dying. Even in 8th grade, I took a course or whatever, and I used to bartend in my late teens, early 20s, and the place that I bartended, there was a mortuary science school down the street, and these two guys would often come in and have drinks or whatever, and I'd ask them all these crazy questions, and I would always ask, how do you guys address, the people? And they're like, oh, well, there's this thing that, you put them on their head and it spins around and you put their pants on that way. And I was like, really? And they looked at me and they're like, no, Katie. So they would love to tell me just random funny stories.
You're right.
We have no idea, right? We can only imagine. It's not a glimpse of life.
Yeah, one of the pickup lines we used to always say, because it was always, particularly for the guys that were single in mortuary school, to go out and just go someplace and tell somebody that you were a mortician or a funeral director or an embalmer just seemed kind of turn off. So they would always say we were a post-healthcare professional.
Too funny.
Yeah. So... Yeah. So,
well, Gordon, it's been a sincere pleasure. It's just been super enjoyable. I wish we were doing this over coffee or a cocktail.
Yeah.
Chit-chatting.
Yeah. I'd love to hear your all's backstory as well. So,
well, we will send you the recording because we have this flipped on us last series when Chrissy Barlahan actually interviewed Kate and I. So after we get off this one, we'll send that your way. How about that?
All right. That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, Startup Nation, thank you so much for voting for Gordon Brewer. It's been a sincere pleasure for us interviewing him and getting up close and personal. Like Kate said, he's an awesome and amazing storyteller. We so appreciated him being on here. And we hope that you guys join us next time as you guys voted for us to interview Jessica Tapana. So we'll be interviewing her next.
Join
us.
She's a good one.
Yeah. So Startup Nation, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for allowing us to inspire you from startup to mastery. And if you're really enjoying the podcast, don't forget to subscribe. And where can you do that? Right on the website. So if you're on the website, hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll get all of our podcasts. And we've been podcasting since 2016. So we have a weekly podcast full of ninja tips, private practice building tricks, hacks, and all of that great stuff. So Startup Nation, we'll see you next time, and stay inspired, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Gordon. See you next time, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on The Private Practice Startup. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and so much more.